Amen. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to share with you the things that Abba's been laying on our heart. I don't know where you are in your personal relationship with Him. I know most of you that are inside the house today, a lot of you that are online. But I'm telling you, this is truly the defining hour of the body of Messiah. And it's incumbent upon us as believers, like Shepherd John was just sharing with you as he segued into what I'm about to share. It's important for you to know Abba's timing, his calendar. And the reason for that is because there's so much happening in the earth right now. If you don't know where he's at the proper time, you can be deceived. There's a lot of deception going on. How many of you know that the enemy is doing everything he can to distract and to divide his people, Yahweh's people? Amen? On the other hand, Abba's doing everything he can to unify us. I've noticed that the enemy is not usually around as much when strife and division's happening. He's always where unity is being cultivated. That's where he tends to do his business, where he tends to work. And what I was trying to do is to make some things plain to us, to share some things with us in the season that we're living in now. I believe some of the things that we're hearing that he's reserved just for this generation right now. And I'm convinced that the purpose of that is to enable us to see the genuine from the counterfeit. And so that's why I want to initiate this teaching this afternoon by reminding you of what 2 Timothy 2:15 says. And it's speaking specifically to you, and it says, "Study to show yourself approved unto Yah, a workman that needs not to be ashamed." How can I keep from being ashamed? Have you ever pondered that question? By rightly dividing the word of truth. And so I challenge you to listen to what I'm about to share with you this afternoon. Go back and measure it against the only thing that you can measure. That you can look at extra biblical sources. You can look at outside commentaries. You can look at my own personal opinions. But you need to go back and measure what you're hearing against the unadulterated, uncompromised living word of Elohim, which I believe is the Hebrew language. And if you do that, you will find yourself in a good place in the days that's coming, because I'm telling you, there is a shaking coming. There's a refining fire coming, and it's going to begin in his house first. And I am here to share with you this afternoon, there are a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing. In fact, I don't mind telling you, I had an encounter head-on yesterday with a wolf in sheep's clothing, doing everything he could to destroy the innocent. This man was a pastor. Is a pastor. And if we don't know those things, if we're not cognizant, if we're not aware of what's going on, you can be easily seduced. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, I will not be seduced. Now, as I get ready to look at this, I believe this is the 26th part. Thank you, Tim, Richard, and Charlene. Amen. You've fed my addiction. I want to just issue that disclaimer. I am a clock watcher. I am a calendar addict. And so it was Tim. A number of years ago, I started looking at Abba's creation calendar, and then I bumped head on into Tim and Richard and Charlene, and they began to share some things about the creation covenant and calendar. And here we are, at least 20-something parts in this series. I'm not going to stop numbering. I'll keep numbering so you can go back maybe and find a specific place that you might want to go back and look. But I doubt that I will ever quit teaching on the calendar, because now every time I look, I'm seeing something that I've never seen before. But what I want to do today, I want to take a little bit different perspective than what we have previously. And the title of this teaching, actually the subtitle, the restoration of the calendar is the title. The subtitle is the Mastermind's Reflections. And we're going to look at two individuals, two principal entities, two prominent figures in your scriptures that I like to call a mastermind. The reason for that I'll explain, or it will be explained as we get a little bit further into today's teaching. Moshe and King David. And what we have been doing for quite some time now is working to untangle what is currently referred to as the biblical calendar. And there are a lot of cumbersome religious trappings that have been wrapped around the calendars that we keep. And I get people quite often asking me, what's wrong with the calendar that we're currently adhering to? and they get really upset when I start talking to them. And some of them are pretty well founded in the Hebrew Messianic community and in the church. Why do we need to know the calendar? Well, let me just ask you this. If you were about to get married, gentlemen, and you know that your wedding is going to start a certain time, and you decide, well, yeah, this particular date's not that important. I'll show up tomorrow. What do you think's going to happen? Well, maybe you decide I'll show up a day early and she's not there. What do you think's going to happen? Well, the calendar has to do with the divine appointment scheduled for the groom and his betrothed, his bride. And if you understand that, then it kind of gives you a little bit more of an idea how important these holy convocations are as they're delineated in the true creation covenant calendar. And we need to know what Torah is truly saying about creation and the calendar, where it was initiated, how it was set into motion, how it has been structured, how it was literally detailed in numerous places from Genesis chapter 1 forward through the book of Revelation. And some of the things I'm going to present to you this afternoon, I do believe if we were inside a court of law, you would have a hard time arguing against the position that I'm going to establish here this evening. Now, having said that, we have a lot of breast-beating lunar solar calendar keepers, Enochian calendar keepers, those that adhere into the Zadok calendar. Some of you may, when I start mentioning those names, your eyes get kind of glazed over, and you probably haven't been doing much of a study on it. I suggest you go back and familiarize yourself with them, because if you want to know how to keep the genuine calendar, then you need to familiarize yourself with the counterfeit as well. Having said that, all of those entities in the counterfeit side, they've been rallying together and joining to, they've kind of put their fight aside temporarily amongst themselves, and they have joined against the only principal enemy that they collectively have, and that's those of us that are keeping a 360-day year, specifically a dawn day start to that calendar year that we believe was initiated in Genesis chapter 1, and it is clearly substantiated in numerous incidents and dates that are arrayed and there for you to see from Genesis chapter 1 through the book of Revelation. I also want you to understand that when you consider context, there are so many other texts that are unquestionably pointing to the year as having been patterned, seeded, duplicated, and I love the word that Tim uses all the time, shene, which literally indicates that it has to be an exact copy, a duplicate copy that we will see time after time after time. And those seeding incidents have caused the commencement of that calendar to become really obvious today to a lot of us. And if you go back and study the Torah precepts, the ancient origins of the calendar, you can see that it was launched at the Tekufah, the marking of the shadow, which I believe began in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Now, when you start hearing those kinds of things, and I'm pretty adamant about my belief and my position, I want to share some things with you because this subject demands exhaustive study. You just can't casually look at this subject regarding the creation covenant calendar and say, yeah, I've got all of that, I'm good to go, let's move on. What you will more than likely do, you will say, that's such a profound and deep subject, I really don't need it, I'll just continue in the current path that I'm on and not worry about it. But I'm here to tell you that in the days in front of us, your safety, your livelihood, and the lives of those that are around you may very well depend on what calendar you're keeping. I am convinced that there will be days in the future in front of us when Abba will lift up a company of individuals and translate them to a place of safety, just like he did Elijah, just like he did Paul, just like he did our Messiah Yeshua, and just like he did Philip the evangelist when he was ministering as well. You can say, I don't know if I believe that. Well, personally, I don't care whether you believe that or not. I believe that it's scriptural patterns, and that those patterns are going to be incumbent upon us to follow in the days ahead. Now, saying that, what we need to do is to go back and look at the foundation of the creation calendar. And as I said, I want to look at it from a different perspective. I want to give you a comparison of the accounts of both Moshe and King David, specifically the narratives that each of those two supplied. And what I then want to do is to contrast the two for accuracy's sake. Because if you find something said in one place in the Torah, it has to be repeated and duplicated throughout the context of Torah from Genesis to Revelation. Everything has to be established in the mouth of at least two, preferably three witnesses. If it's inconsistent, if one contradicts another, then I would suggest that you need to go back and look at the particular translation you're looking at. And the translation you're looking at and your religious paradigm and tradition may be what's causing you to think or to assume that your position or what you're being shown this afternoon is a contradiction. I submit to you that we need to go back and look very carefully. And so we're going to spend some time looking at King David. We've looked a lot at the things that Moshe had to share. But let me just speak a few minutes regarding King David. I like to refer to him as a mastermind, a Torah mastermind. Why is that? If you look at his works, and we're going to look at that this afternoon, and put them alongside that of Moshe, I don't think that there's anybody aside from maybe Yeshua that had an authoritative position or platform to speak from like Moshe and King David. A lot of people, in looking at King David, his history, what we see in the examples we're giving in the Tanakh, he was both a political and a military mastermind. Few scholars would argue that. But what we want to do when we begin to study King David specifically as an authority figure regarding the creation covenant calendar, then we want to go back and excise, if you will, the published faults that we see accorded to King David. And because of his published faults, the narrative around the fact that he was a murderer and that he was an adulterer and that he was a liar and that he had all kinds of other issues, when you hear those things, people deprecate those, the idea of him being a Torah mastermind, and they use those faults to qualify his place in the Torah, okay? But if you begin to examine King David and the writings attributed to King David, you'll find that he had a specific and unique knowledge of the Torah from a powerful Hebraic perspective. And then if you want to find out who really understood the Torah, it's easy to say that man believes in the Torah when everything's going along great in his life. But if you want to know if a guy understands the significance of the redemption plan of Yahweh, look at his life in the darkest hours. And so when you go back and begin to look at King David and see how he spiritually and then physically applied the Torah in his life, in particular during those highlighted imperfections that I was just alluding to, and combine that with his frank acknowledgement of Elohim, Yahweh, as the framer of creation, it reveals a level of understanding that King David had that I believe is equal to that of Moshe. And some might say that I'm blaspheming when I say this, but Yeshua as well, because Yeshua, when he would share something, he was always quoting the word, okay? Now, a lot of times when people look at the writings of King David, they call them poetic works. And because they're quote-unquote poetic works, they a lot of times have been set aside because they don't really have the significance and the oomph, if you will, the emphasis that historical works like that of what Moshe did. But it's my opinion that when you see the poetic works of King David, which clearly substantiate and shed light on the origin of the creation, and specifically the calendar of creation, which you can't separate the origin of creation, beginning of creation, from the calendar. When you start looking at what his words have to say, that it begins to identify him, in my opinion, as a Torah mastermind that was infinitely and intimately familiar with the calendar's ancient origins and what he also did in writing those words down, he qualified himself, in my opinion, as an expert in the calendar and creational truths that we're going to share with you this afternoon. And by himself being qualified as an expert, it now gives us the right to quote him, to call him into a contested courtroom case where he is qualified as an expert, and then use the writings of this expert to begin to establish our opinion regarding how he is contrasted against Moshe, if he is against Moshe. Do you see that? Now, what is it about Moshe and King David that leads us to believe that they both had privy insight to what happened at creation? Well, the first thing I want to share with you is what King David had to say about the light of the world. And we're going to look at that. We've got a lot of ground to cover this afternoon. We're going to look at it closely. And we're also going to look at how the light of the world became the garment of creation. And if you'll just indulge me for a few minutes, we're going to talk about it, because in our previous discussions, we have looked at this and we've shown that there were patterns at creation's inception where you see, literally, physically, they are fulfilled in the person of our Messiah, Yeshua. John says he was the one who was in the beginning. He was with Elohim. He was Elohim. He was the Word. Without him, nothing was made. And so you see then that as John later describes him, same chapter in John 1, he describes him as the light of the world, the light of all men. And so you find that he is the one that is instrumental in all of creation. And so he is indeed both simultaneously word and light equally. You can't separate word from light. You understand that? You can't separate word, light, and seed. You could interchange those words no matter where you are in the Scripture, no matter what you're discussing. If you're talking about word, you can say light. If you're talking about light, you can say seed. And you can see that he was expressly sent to illuminate all men and the world. Why is that important? Because he, according to what we read there in John, and according to what you're going to see regarding King David's statements, his position, his narrative, and what Moshe had to say, he, the light, existed first. He was the Word, he was the light, he was the seed, and then he's deposited into creation, followed by darkness. Never the reverse. Okay? That's the dawn day pattern where day one's evening and morning, in other words, vayi erev, vayehi boker, are found, proving that the mixing of darkness followed the initiation of that first light, and the subsequent dawn sets day two into motion. Now, Brittany talked about this the last time that she was up here. She shared it, and she was all literally neck deep in the notes that I had. A lot of what I have shared with that I'm going to share with you this afternoon, I had already written down, and she was just treading all in that. That's the Holy Spirit's involved. Yes, you may find it hard to believe, she can hear. It literally has to do, creation, with the initiation, if you will, of the covenant between the pieces. Yahweh is stepping out into creation, and he's about to set something prophetically into motion regarding his redemption plan. Now, most of you, when you think about King David and the works that he did, one of the first things that comes into your mind, Psalm 23, but a lot of you think about the Messianic Psalm of chapter 22, when it literally is alluding to what took place. And this was prophesied and written, and scholars have proven it, almost 1,000 years before the execution of Yeshua. And this psalm, Psalm 22, and again, when the scholars go back and look at it, they acknowledge that what's happening is a fulfillment of Genesis chapter 3:15, where the serpent is said that he is going to bruise the heel of Messiah, the coming Messiah, but yet this Messiah would bruise his head. And if you go back and look at it, go back and look at the context of Genesis chapter 3, it's a clear picture, a pattern of the creation plan of Elohim, where you find an interesting entity. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. Right there you have an interesting being called the Aleph and Tav. The Aleph and Tav is initiated right there in creation, stepping out between the pieces and planning for the redemption of Elohim, for the redemption of mankind according to the works of Elohim. And what you find happening there is the same thing you see in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. How many of you know what happens in chapter 3? The fall of Adam. Adam and Eve are in total disarray. They have been separated from the Creator. And what happens? You have the voice walking in the cool of the garden. And the first thing that you should think about when you see that is that there has been a division between Adam and the Creator, and the voice steps on the scene, the Aleph and Tav, the manifest presence, and what he does is he begins to walk between the pieces because the Adam could not offer himself as a sacrifice. And so that's what you see happen. That was what happened when Yeshua was executed on the stake. That was the pinnacle, if you will, of the covenant between the pieces. You have him staked out on the earth between heaven and earth according to the very same plan you see in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. You see the Aleph and Tav suspended on that stake, and he is literally there in between the pieces, the ultimate, the penultimate, if you will, redeemer of all mankind. And so that's what you see beginning to happen here. Now, when we consider this current solar year that we're in right now, 365.24 days. Nobody would argue that. I'll stipulate to that. If we were in a court of law, I'd say there's no point in you bringing that out. I understand that we do have a current solar year of 365.24. It is my contention that in the days in front of us, something is going to transpire, and Yeshua mentions it, except the days be shortened. Now, he's not, if you go back and look at the pattern, there's not going to be a pattern where the 24-hour day is shortened. It is going to be the collective days be shortened. In other words, it's talking about the length of the year. And it's going to be shortened from 365.24 back to a 360-day. Now, when you understand that 360-day creation calendar, you also have to understand that the mechanism that it's the key marker of keeping the 360-day calendar is the vernal equinox, or the marking of the shadow. And so again, I stipulate to the fact 365.24 current day year. I do believe that we're going to have a 360-day year in the near future. I also will stipulate to the fact that the sun's path through the heavenly ecliptic as we know it is currently a 360-degree circuit. Now, it's interesting because as we trace that circuit that's in the heavens, and you see the shadow of it depicted here on the earth. Are y'all with me? Listen, if you're having a struggle understanding, then you need to stop right now and say, Father, help me to not be distracted so that I can get this, because this is going to help you, hopefully. When we trace that circuit in the stellar heavens as it's depicted on the earth, there is an anomaly called the analemma, which is actually an astronomical plot of the sun's position throughout the year as it travels that circuit. How many of you remember Psalm 19, where it talks about the sun makes its circuit like the bridegroom leaving his chuppah, his chamber, okay? And so when you begin to look at the shadow picture that's cast on the earth after the pattern of the sun's travel in the heavens, you see that it actually forms a figure 8. And I'm going to show you that in just a few seconds. And if you look at this figure 8, you'll see that the one end of it is elongated to a little bit, and it seems to me that the elongated southern end could actually reflect the current discrepancy between the two calendar year lengths. That's just my opinion. I believe that when we go from a 365 back to a 360, that you'll probably see that figure 8 begin to transform. As we are speaking, the sun's movement right now is slightly less than 1 degree per day. Therefore, if there was a shortening of days, which means that we would elongate that a little bit, it would be found making the 360-day calendar in that circuit a perfect timekeeping device, ticking at the rate of exactly 1 degree per day throughout the year. Now, can you see that picture there of the analemma? I want you to notice that right there in the center is a conjunction point. Conjunction, junction, watch your function. Okay? Now, when I was looking at this, I thought, oh my goodness, that's the ancient method of covenant affirmation. That's a depicted pattern prophesying every day of every individual's life on this planet. And if you were able to get into the heavens, the same thing would be depicted. It's actually giving you a shadow picture of the covenant between the pieces, where an individual is required to walk between the two halves of a separated sacrifice, like Shepherd John was alluding to, in the same pattern as this figure 8. Now think about this. The sun twice crosses the equator. Where you see that conjunction point, that's where the sun will be crossing the equator. At the conjunction of the center, listen to me, and it's my opinion that where that conjunction occurs, it's marking the place of the altar where the two halves of that sacrifice would have been placed. Well, why is that important? Because the crossing place, that conjunction right there in the center, represents the beginning and the return of the sun's course. It's actually representing the beginning in the spring, at the vernal spring equinox, and the autumnal, or the autumn's sign in the heavens, the autumnal equinox. And it's very apropos that the marking of this shadow literally follows the pattern of Moshe, and we're going to look at that in Exodus chapter 33, where Moshe is put into the cleft of the rock. Listen to me carefully. The cleft of the rock becomes the pierce place, or the conjunction. The conjunction's the place of the altar. Did you just hear me? If you see that conjunction, it's piercing right there in the center. It's the pierce place. When Moshe is placed in the rock, it's my opinion it is placed right here figuratively at the equatorial location where this altar would have been. Why? It's because that's the place where the shadow passes him by. How can I say that? You remember what Abba said to him? I'm going to put you in the cleft of the rock, and I'm going to cover your eyes with my hand. The word cover we'll look at in a few minutes. I'm going to cover you, and you're going to see. Listen to me. That's interesting. He says, you can't look at me and live, but I'm going to allow the shadow of my passing to go by. He's showing Moshe the original covenant walk between the pieces that is illustrated in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and there's so many other places that you can see this same pattern demonstrated, that it's uncanny that we have not taken the time to extract this in the years that we've been doing this. It's just been amazing to me. So just let me ask you a question. Do you think the altar is important? If you are standing here juxtaposed from the Creator because there's some element in you that's keeping you alienated from Him, and you need to be reconciled to Him, and so in order for that to happen, we need to offer up a covenant, and there's going to be a sacrifice laid on the altar, okay? And I know that I can't walk through it just like Abraham. Brittany touched on this last time she was here. Abraham and the walk between the pieces, listen to me, if that altar is there at the equator, and the equator is the place where the sacrifices are laid, it would seem to me that the positioning of that altar is important to us. And I need to be in close proximity to that altar when the sacrifice is laid, so that I can begin to see the original inception of the course of the sun and when he returns. Did you know that that's called the Tekufah? Did you hear what I just said? So it would lead me to believe that marking the shadow is important, because it's like me taking and saying, okay, we're going to put this altar on the earth, and as soon as someone is able to mediate between me and Yahweh, here's this altar, and I'm going to mark the shadow, because I can't walk through it, but I know the moment that I need him most, he's going to show up on time and walk through this sacrifice on my behalf. That's exactly what these holy convocations are there for. Every time, the Shabbat is the number one, but every holy convocation on a 360-day calendar, in my opinion, is marking out the course of the sun. And I'm telling you, I got so excited when I started seeing some of this, it just blew my mind. Some of y'all, it doesn't take much to blow your mind. How many of you know when a dandelion gets maturity and you take that thing and you go, yeah. Don't take much to blow your mind. I'm watching you. Y'all sit back there and you look all sanctified and sanctimonious. And I'm getting this. I'm getting this. And I'm looking, I can see your eyes doing this. Yeah. Sometimes I can hear Popeye in your head. I've stands all I can stands until I can stands no more. But you're going to get this. You're going to get this. We're going to cram it in. We're going to do just like two pieces of a puzzle that don't fit the way we want it. We're going to stomp them in there if we have to. We're going to get this. Why is my supposition important? Because there are a lot of other scholars besides myself. And I'm not trying to say I'm a scholar. Boy, that didn't come out good, did it? A lot more scholarly than I am. Morgenstern, Hollis, and others that show that the orientation of the... Listen to this. This blew my mind. The orientation of the wilderness tabernacle and the subsequent temple would have been set in such a way as to cause the rays of the rising sun to shine through the east, over the altar of burnt offering, and through the door into the holiest of holies. And so when you see the equator here, the equator is a circle of latitude that runs from east to west, and so it shows you the blueprint where you have the circuit of the sun written in the heavens and mirrored on the earth. And just as it functions as that to set the course in the heavens at a specific time and date and place, the same pattern is seen here on the earth. I think it would be important for us to know what time it is. Say amen. Even the ancient pagans understood that the circuit of the sun in the heavens actually represented the redemption plan of man. What they'd said was that the sun would rise to prominence, S-U-N, as a god. He would rise to prominence, and he is enthroned, if you will, at the vernal equinox. Stop right there for a second. Is the altar a throne? Yes, it is. You know, I got one yes, and I got a lot of this. If the altar is a throne, and the equator seems to be the place where the sacrifices are led, where the sun makes its course through those sacrifices, then I would suggest, and the Tekufa is at the equator when that's marked, I would suggest that the Tekufa and the marking of the shadow of the Tekufa is also the place where not only is it an altar, but it's the place where he is enthroned. I love those hesitant comments. I got y'all today. They believed that he was enthroned at the spring equinox, and as he, listen to this, this is powerful. And as he traveled, his descent would be represented on the horizon, and he would begin to make his departure or his exile for a season. We're literally right now, we're coming into this time of the year when the pagans would say that the sun is he's being exiled, he's making his departure, and he's going to go under the earth, he's going to go into darkness for a season, dead, buried, and resurrected, and then he turns around and he makes his course back up. Every year, it's a prophetic declaration. Every day when you begin to understand the marking of the shadow in the course of the sun, it's actually giving you the redemption plan of Elohim in everything that you can see. And I thought, isn't that interesting? It is the sun in its travels that gives life to all of the plants and through photosynthesis. And we just planted some tender greens in a greenhouse, and we've still got a shade cloth over it. And I couldn't understand those things, jumped up real quick, very spindly, and had no thick stem, no thick body. And then I began to research. The reason they jumped up so quick is that they're reaching for the sun. And when I'm preparing this teaching, I thought, oh my God, we ought to be spindly. Because we're stretching with everything we can to reach for the sun. And I thought, my goodness, here we have an opportunity, Brenda and I, to bring the sun a little closer. Thicken them up a little bit. And you bring the sun a little closer, you put a light in there. Do you see what I'm saying? So I was trying to teach us something. I'm telling you what's about to happen in the days in front of us. You better know what time it is. Turn to your neighbor and ask him, what time is it? What I'm sharing with you, you have to ask yourself, is this testifying of the creational blueprint in Genesis chapter 1, where you see the light walk between Elohim and creation? In the beginning, Yahweh creates the heavens and the earth was without form and darkness, tohu vabohu. There you go. There's the pieces. There's got to be a mediator. The fundamental plan of Elohim regarding his creation had already been set into motion, and the enemy thinks that he's going to move himself in and stop the plan of Elohim. No, all he did was cause this entity to step out. And he unclothes himself of his deity and his personage inside Elohim. This just blows my mind. And he steps out of Elohim. He steps out of himself because he was and he is to come. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. He was the Word. He was God. He was the instrument of creation. He steps out of himself and takes on another garment. He chooses to clothe himself with another garment. Can you see that? And so when you begin to look at the path of the Son, it's actually alluding to that redemptive act, and it's foreshadowing all of the events that we've been talking about so far, especially what you read regarding Abraham, when Abraham was put into a deep sleep and he sees a smoking furnace, a lamp and a smoking furnace passing through the pieces. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is he showing us? While I was still pondering over this, I like to look at the numeric values. And so immediately that phrase, and it was evening and it was morning, Vayahi Erev and Vayahi Boker, it jumps out. So I said, what is the value? 636. I said, what does that mean? 6 plus 3 plus 6 gives you 15. The numeric value that's associated with the number 15 is associated with the Hebrew root Yagav, which, now I'll just stop right here and throw this out. A lot of people want to discount what we teach when we start sharing some things regarding the gematria and the numeric values. And that they can say, well, that's over there, that's Kabbalistic terminology. Well, Yahweh is the creator of everything. He's the one that created this alphanumeric language. His ways and his thoughts are higher than ours. But if it is an alphanumeric language, then I will submit to you that the numbers are as important as the letters are. All right? And so if you look at that number 15 and the fact that it has the same value as the Hebrew word Yagav. Now remember, we're talking about, and it's evening and it's morning. The word morning there is boker. Boker literally connotes the idea of someone like the Aleph and Tav, who is a plow, an ox and a plow, just plowing open the darkness and the dawn explodes. That's what boker indicates. Well, look at this. That word Yagav is a verb that actually indicates to plow, to till the ground. Specifically, the individual who's doing that called the husbandman. And then if you look at the root, the two-letter stem, the gemel bait, it actually points towards the back or the shoulders, listen to that, of a man who's hunched over as he's pulling the plow. You see what I'm talking about? Haven't we been talking about the sun making his course, the sun plowing open the ground, the sun initiating his course at the dawn of the day? Man, I'm telling you, this is pretty powerful. Is that just a simple adjective, or is the writer of Genesis trying to convey that there is a pattern where the idea of the sun as a man is seen as he plows open the darkness of the ground, setting his daily course? Again, it's another creational sign that is an ever-present daily prophecy of the resurrection of our Messiah. While I was looking at this, I believe the Holy Spirit dropped this into my spirit. Listen to me carefully, we're talking about the analemma, right? We're talking about the course of the sun throughout the yearly 360-day cycle. Do y'all have that picture in your head? And remember, we also talked about Moshe being put in the cleft of the rock. What was it that Moshe was shown? Moshe was shown the back parts, this part. It's my opinion that what Moshe was allowed to see, I believe that he saw a living, walking Torah scroll. And I believe that what he saw was the Torah written on the scrolls of this, whoever this was that walked away from him. Are you hearing me? Is it possible that we could also be talking about the course of the sun, describing the scourging of our Messiah, the Son, S-O-N, S-U-N, who would later, at the epitome of the covenant between the pieces, offer his back to the whip as it plowed furrows across his body, representing the back part of the sun as he travels in his course. And listen to me, the sun becomes the visible manifestation of creation's covenant. And this is my opinion. I believe every divine appointment or tick of the creation covenant's calendar presents a living rehearsal of the scourging of our Messiah as he walks between the pieces on behalf of his efforts to redeem fallen man. Listen to me, it would have been one thing to redeem man, spirit and soul. But what about the body? That's why it was necessary for him to take that scourging and crucifixion upon him so that we could be set free physically, healed physically. The Hebrew supplies us insight into the mind of the Creator. The Creator, listen to me carefully, was not bound by and is not bound by time today. Yet he chose time as the dominant, listen to me, this is again, you have to stop and think about these things. Time is the dominant sign of his redemption plan. Time is innately and progressively demonstrated in the language of creation. Again, that word for morning, boker. Look at this, this ought to blow you away. When most of the time you look at this word boker, when you hear it, if you studied Hebrew, the first thing that pops into your mind, morning. But if you go back and look at how it's used and how often it's used, the ideal meaning of that root, boker, indicates to look upon, to survey, to look accurately at or for something, and to examine what I'm looking at. The second most usage of that word boker is associated with the shepherd who does that very thing. He's searching for his flock. He's inquiring of them. Now stop right there. Keep that in your mind, because when you see the picture of the sun beginning his course as the dawn breaks the morning, it's actually painting the picture of the shepherd who's looking closely and carefully. He's examining creation. He's looking intently like a shepherd would for his flock. Why would that need to take place? You got to go back and look at what just occurred. Tohu vabohu. Did the plan of Yahweh get derailed? Was it a shipwreck? Or did he intentionally step out looking forward prophetically to the day when he would see his flock established, just like what had already been written in the stellar heavens? He knew that it had been written there, and it was just a matter of time before it would be accomplished in the earth at the same time. The third most usage of that is where it's translated as morning. And finally, the last usage of it is with the word for cattle, bakar. And I thought, wow, there are so many different places where Abba's confirming to us the importance of his calendar. I'm going to give you one here that you probably have never you probably have seen it but never have paid attention to. But when you start paying attention to these things, they link up together and cannot be separated. How many of you remember the prophecy of Zacharias, who was struck dumb, mute, until the birth of his son, John the Immerser? The moment that his tongue is turned loose, he begins to make a prophecy regarding not only his son, but the purpose of his son's coming, who would be the forerunner of the Messiah who's to come, right? You remember that? In Luke chapter 1, 78 and 79, Zacharias says this: through the tender mercy of our Elohim. Tender mercy, how could we know his tender mercy? Now, he's just made a statement, through his tender mercy. What tender mercy? What are you talking about? Well, he begins to reveal it to you. Whereby the day spring from on high has visited us, to give light to them that sit in darkness, and in the shadow of death to guide our feet into the way of peace. Did you read that? Well, you know what that word day spring is translated? Even in the Greek language, it's actually, if you look in the Septuagint, it's actually the same word that's used all the way back there in Genesis chapter 2, where Yahweh plants a garden in the Kadam, the eastward place. The earliest time, the place that was in front, the place that preceded in time, the beginning, the dawn. Did you just hear what Zacharias prophesied? He talked about the one who would be dawning from on high. The day spring is an allegorical term regarding the Messiah, who would be the dawn, the new beginning, the sun as he would step on out into creation and separate men from darkness. That's what he was talking to. And God, listen to me, he's telling us that he's going to give light to those that sit in darkness. Now, Zacharias knew that Yeshua would reset the calendar, and then that would initiate the dawn day start of the calendar. In fact, I can prove that it had been kept long before that, but he knew that this was what Yeshua would come to bring that attention back to it again. And that in the process, by keeping closely the 360-day calendar, that Yeshua would once again become that smoking lamp walking between Elohim and man, setting him in direct opposition to the Babylonian influence of both the lunar solar calendar of Israel and the Roman calendar at that same time. Isn't that interesting? Now, while we're looking here at this word for boker, say that with me, boker, I want you to look at what Parkhurst has to say about the two-letter root, Beit Kuf Resh. The Beit Kuf root indicates to empty something out, to cause it to fail, to exhaust it. And it's closely related to the idea of a vine that casts its fruit early and wastes it. How does that fit in this and the evening and the boker? What we find here is that it's adding clarity to the fact that this takes place after Lucifer has been cast to the ground. Lucifer had cast his fruit to the ground, and what resulted was a tohu vabohu desolation in Genesis 1:2. And so now what you see immediately when the sun steps out on the morning, it's painting a picture of the shepherd who sets into motion the redemption plan and looks to the future of his flock, and he prophesies as he steps out. He's prophesying of the redemption of man long before Adam was ever created. That blows my mind. Let's take a little side note here. Isaiah 53, one of my favorite chapters. I quote Isaiah 53, verse 5. He was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. And what? By his stripes we are healed. Remember, we were talking about the stripes of that scourge, remember? The vast majority of us, when we go back and consider this method of our Messiah's torture before he goes to the execution stake, we have a tendency to look at the scourging of Yeshua through the eyes of Jewish tradition, where the penalty was supposed to be 39 stripes. You couldn't go past 39 stripes, right? The Romans had no law. The Romans could strike you as many times as they wanted. Most of the time, it was 40 licks. You need to remember that when Yeshua was being tortured before going to the cross, that this was Roman punishment. And the method of torture that the Romans used was called a flagrum or a flagrum, from which we get our English word fillet, like a fillet knife. The instrument that they used was a short stock handle with 3 distinct leather strips coming out of it. And at the end of that leather strip, there would be bone, metal, or hooks embedded. Now, if they did surpass the Jewish method of 39 stripes and struck him 40 times 3 different pieces, that would give you 120. And that helps you to understand why in Genesis chapter 6:3 that it says that man's life would be 120 days or 120 years. 1 stripe equaling 1 year to purchase the life of man. And I thought, isn't it ironic that man's red blood cells, just the red blood cells, lived for 120 days? See, Yahweh had this planned out long before the enemy thought he would circumvent the plans. Amen? I also found it kind of interesting, since we know that our Messiah represented and adhered to very closely the 360-day calendar, keeping it to a very minute detail. I found it interesting that he is assaulted by those that kept a lunar calendar and a Roman calendar. Raise your hand. How many of you believe that you're in Messiah? You're probably going to be assaulted in the days ahead by the lunar calendar keepers and the Roman calendar keepers. Amen? And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because if you go back and look at the method of that punishment, then the method of punishment was familiar to both the lunar calendar keeper and the Roman calendar keeper. And it seems to me like, could there have been a spiritual war, a spiritual calendar war taking place? The lunar calendar adherents, the Roman calendar adherents, they're assaulting the creation covenant, the keeper. They're assaulting the nucleus, the linchpin, the instrument of the creation covenant calendar, the S-U-N-S-O-N, Son himself. I don't know if you're stretching this. You're just pulling. Well, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to show you so many different things this afternoon that are quote-unquote coincidental that I just pulled out of the proverbial hat that you're going to have to say, I don't know how you did it. Thinking along those lines, I'm going to show you that incident that we mentioned earlier regarding Moshe and that encounter there in Exodus chapter 33. Now, if you've studied this, it finishes the chapter with Moshe being placed into the rock. How many of you remember that? And we're familiar with that all the time. But the chapter begins with Elohim talking to Moshe about how stiff-necked and rebellious Israel is. And he basically tells him that I'm not going to go with you, but I'll send an angel along the way. And then Moshe makes a statement in contradiction or contrast to that. If you don't go with us, then we're not going to go up. And then it culminates in Exodus chapter 33, verse 18 through 23. And then listen to this. Yahweh replies to Moshe's queries that no man can see him and live. However, he says, I'm going to take you, Moshe, and I'll put you in a cliff. That word cliff in the Hebrew indicates a pierced place. I'll put you in a pierced place in the rock, and I'm going to cover you as you pass by, and I'm going to allow you to see my back parts. Now, wait just a second, because if you go back and remember, Moshe asks Elohim to let me see your glory. He didn't ask to see his face, okay? But Yahweh says, I'm going to cover you and let you see my back parts, not my face. Well, that's not what Moshe asked. And I want to remind you that Elohim can't be seen because he's outside of time. And so for us to see the manifest presence of Elohim, we have to see that in the S-U-N-S-O-N, okay? Now, this place here where he says, I'm going to put you in the cleft of the rock and I'm going to cover you, that's the Hebrew word, Strong's number 5526, called sachak, from whence we get the word sukkah, and it literally means to cover or overshadow. Did you hear that? He literally telling Moshe, I'm going to put you under the shadow. What happens at the equator? What happens between the pieces? What happens when the sun makes its conjunction between the vernal equinox and then the autumnal equinox as he's making his turn, going between the pieces? You have the marking of the shadow. It's my opinion that he puts him there in the cleft of the rock where the shadow is passing at the time that the Tekufah is taking place, and he's letting Moshe see the eternal covenant pattern where someone is going to walk between the pieces. Now you got to ask yourself, why is Moshe being shown that? Hello? The Son, S-O-N-S-U-N, represents the manifest presence that's visible through the lens of the creation covenant calendar, and it is our only method of seeing him. If you've seen me, Yeshua said, you've seen the Father. And so if we want to see the Father, he can only be seen through the Son. And so when Elohim says, Moshe, you can't see me and live, but I'm going to cover you with my hand and I'll let you see my back parts, what he's doing, he's literally saying, I'm going to allow you to see the S-U-N-S-O-N as he passes by in his course, walking between the pieces. All right? That word see there comes from the Hebrew word ra'ah, which means to perceive, to understand, but it also can indicate an image that's reflected in the mirror. And so even though we can't see the source of creation's light, we can see it mirrored in the luminaries. Therefore, we can see that Moshe is being allowed, I believe he was given a panoramic view of the creation that was being rehearsed in the form of a covenant again between the pieces as he's placed right there in that rock. Moshe could not walk between the pieces. And that's the reason Moshe is pleading, litigating, if you will, not begging, he's litigating with Yahweh. Because Israel is rebellious and stiff-necked. And they're supposed to go into the land of Canaan, and here's Elohim said, listen, I'm not going to have anything else to do with you. I'm disassociating myself with you, when he had promised all the way back from Genesis chapter 1 to be with them and go with them. He promised that to Abraham, and now he's not. Somebody's got to walk between these pieces. Moshe can't walk between it and mediate between Yahweh and Elohim and Israel. You see that? Again, numeric value. The word ra'ah for see has a value of 206, and it just so happens that equals the value for the Hebrew word davar. And so is it possible, I want you to listen to me carefully, is it possible, because Moshe is allowed to see the davar as he's walking away. Yeshua's the word. Yeshua's the light. So they're synonymous. He's seeing the seed. And so if that's the case, what is being shown is the fact that the calendar is shenaying. It's literally mirroring exactly the course of the sun. And is it possible, I'm just throwing this out, is it possible that the calendar of Elohim, the creation covenant calendar, is it possible that it can literally be considered the word of Elohim? Be careful, I've got it right here. Be careful of your answer. It might expose you. And then I ask, did you just hesitate? So let me just give you the definition of a calendar. Because we're talking about keeping the calendar. If we're going to keep the calendar and it's not Yahweh's word, then I don't think we need to be keeping it. If we're keeping it, we just said that we believe the word is our Messiah. The word is the light. The word follows the same course or pattern as the S-U-N. And the S-U-N-S-O-N regulates the calendar. And so is it possible that that calendar, which is literally defined as a chart, a table, a register, a plan for events, appointments, I love this, a list of legislative bills, ordinances, and laws, the daily schedule of one's life, is it possible that the calendar of Yahweh could literally be considered his word as well. Puts it in a different light, doesn't it? Moshe sees the back parts. The word for back part here is achor, the backside or the rear. But it's defined as the hereafter of time. But you need to understand, from a Hebraic mindset, Moshe wasn't being allowed to see into the future. Moshe was actually being shown the beginning of time. Are you with me? And so Elohim then takes his hand and he says, Moshe, I'm going to allow you to see the beginning of creation. And I believe that what he's alluding to is the original Vayehi Erev, Vayehi Boker, where Moshe is going to be allowed to see the plowman. Do you know who he's going to see when Moshe has his eyes covered? Moshe's being shown the plowman, the husbandman walking between the pieces. And so he's being allowed to see the form of the S-U-N, S-O-N, as he passes by, literally, again, walking between the pieces. On behalf of whom? We're going to look at that. When you look at that word bakor, or akor, for back parts, it can also give direction. I'm going to show you direction, Moshe. I'm going to show you a path or a course. Why would he tell him, I'm going to show you a path or a course, if it was not for the fact that he was going to be allowed to see the plowman walk by? He's showing, look, Moshe, I'm going to show you the course that the plowman that's going to walk past you, and I'm going to allow you to see him. I'm going to let you see his course. I'm going to show you his direction. I'm going to show you his path. Are you getting this? It carries with it the idea of the rising or the beginning of the sun's journey out of the east. Isn't that odd? I'm going to show you the beginning of the sun's journey, Moshe. And then it passes to the west, the Achor. That's literally what he's showing Moshe. I'm showing you the Analima. I'm showing you the path. I'm showing you the walk between the pieces. Now, what you find is that you have the introduction of the light there in Genesis chapter 1. It reveals the redemption of plan of Elohim. And it's requiring him, go back and read it. It requires, the redemption plan requires Elohim to deposit himself into creation in a body. Hello? That's why you have the manifest presence. Do y'all get that? And that body, the manifest presence, the physical body that our Messiah later comes in, is represented or demonstrated in the heavens in the form of the sun. And I thought, is it just me, or does it seem like all of these things are coincidental and I'm just trying to sew them together? But then I look, that word in the Greek, Anatolia or Anatole, the Greek gives you an interesting definition. The Hebrew words kadam, boker, yagav. Isn't it interesting that they all are linking back to the origins of time? Do you think Yahweh's trying to teach us something here? Or maybe it's just an exercise in futility. Anyway, if you begin to read it, you find that Moshe can't see Elohim, but is going to be allowed to see the manifest presence hidden in the cleft or the pierced place of the rock. And now you got to ask yourself, why is this conversation with Moshe and the subsequent demonstration that we've just talked about necessary? In order for you to understand, you have to remember that Israel is supposed to represent Elohim in the earth, right? Aren't we? Aren't we supposed to be the body of Messiah? Israel was called to be the mediator between the nations and Elohim. Did you know that that is our function as well? We should be the go-between. We should be able to go on behalf of those that are without him. We should be able to mediate on their behalf and go to Yahweh on their behalf. You understand that? Now, Israel is supposed to represent the manifest presence of Yahweh in the land and literally suffice as a type of Messiah. And I submit to you that Israel then and Israel now has to do the same thing and serve as a mediator between Elohim and man. Is that hard for you to understand? is it possible that we may have read Exodus chapter 33 wrong, and that's caused us to get to the place where we've misunderstood? Let's go back, and if you'll allow me, I've got 28 minutes. Can y'all hold on? If you back up to Exodus chapter 33, verse 1, you can see Moshe and Israel being given a directive regarding their journey to Canaan. And verse 3, Yahweh declares he's not going with them because of their rebellious ways. Conversation continues. Verse 13, Moshe continues to press the issue by asking Yahweh who's going to go with him into the land. Now, if Yahweh had told me I ain't going to do it, then why are you pressing him? Hello? Unless you know that you have a place to argue your case from. In verses 14 through 15, you get a very convoluted answer in the King James Version. And here's what's said. This is Yahweh speaking. And he said, my presence shall go with, this is after Moshe's saying, listen, I don't know what to do. Who's going with us? And he's arguing again. And he, Elohim, says, my presence shall go with you, and I will give you rest. And then the he here is Moshe. And Moshe turns and speaks to Elohim, and he says, if your presence go not with me, don't carry us up hence. And when you read that, it's a contradiction. Because if in the King James English, it seems as if Yahweh says, look, ho, stop, Moshe, you pushed me to my limits, dude. Your argument, I got you. My presence will go with you, and I'm going to give you rest. Well, if you were Moshe, you just won that argument. Why would you then question him if your presence is not going to go with me when he just said he was? Hello? It's there. That's why you need to go back and break these things down. And now when you break this down, you'll understand why he's going to show Moshe the covenant between the pieces. There are 4 words, actually 2 words repeated that are italicized. With thee. Turn around to your neighbor and say, with thee. They were not in the original language. And so here's what this verse should say. This is Yahweh speaking. And he's speaking to Moses. My presence shall go. I'll give you rest. Now you know why Moshe continues the argument. And he said unto him, if your presence go not, don't carry us up. Now you can understand why Moshe is continuing the conversation, right? Moshe continues his claim. You can't see it in the King James English by declaring previously, go back and read the conversation, that Yahweh had made it known that he had promised that he would go with them. And isn't that exactly why they're separated or distinguished from all the other nations? Now, it's from this lawful point that Moshe specifically uses a very powerful Hebrew word for separated. It's the word palah. And when you read that, it seems again here that Yahweh agrees. But once more, it leads to a mistranslation in the King James text. When is Moshe going to stop his arguing? So let's look at that word palah. It carries the idea of judicial distinction. Something that's deserving judicial punishment, requiring an intercession, a mediation, to make oneself a mediator between Elohim and man. Do you realize what has happened? Yeah, Moshe's telling Elohim, look, wait just a second. If you're not going to go with us, I want to remind you of the original place where you issued a judicial decree, and you made a judicial distinction, and you caused one to step out who would be a mediator between Elohim and man. We need a mediator here. We don't want you to cut us off. We don't want your presence to not go with us. Can y'all see that? Now, what happens next is pretty interesting, because after that, Moshe then asked, show me your glory. And then Yahweh replies. It's pretty interesting. No man can see my face and live. Why does he respond to Moshe like that? Moshe didn't ask to see the face Have y'all ever stopped and read these things? He didn't ask to see the face of Elohim. He asked to see the glory. And now you can say, well, it's just basic semantics. And no, you need to go back and look at this in the Hebrew language. That word for glory there is chavod. And even though it's translated glory, honor, weighty, the Beit Dalet root carries the idea of the original place or time where the first separation occurred. And so Moshe saying, hold up, Abba. Remember, you promised to go with us because you know that we need a mediator. And I want to remind you of the first time that you stepped out into creation and separated yourself and stood out in the midst of waste and desolation and became the mediator between creation and man. That's what Moshe is reminding him of. And this is all about the one who would walk between the pieces. Moshe is being shown that pattern. This is not about an argument. It looks as if it's an argument because of the King James translation. What Abba is allowing us to see is another illustration of the covenant between the pieces being made necessary because Israel is not in a spiritual shape to go into the promised land and deal with all of these pagan entities. And so they got to get themselves right before they go in. And Moshe knows that they're going to be lost. They'll be cut off. They'll never be able to achieve what Abba said they could achieve, all of the promises to Abraham, if there is not one who is a mediator that will walk between the pieces and establish their right wiseness or right standing again. You can't make this stuff up. You have that Greek word anatole, yagav, boker, and now pala and kavod. Each one of those words giving us a clear reference to the original separation and the original searching by the shepherd regarding the manifest presence, the Son, S-U-N-S-O-N, who would step out onto creation. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, the Aleph Tav, between the heavens and the earth, and initiate the course of the Son, beginning to walk between the pieces. And so what's happened here is Moshe is reminding Elohim about what had transpired there in Genesis and what then led throughout the course of Genesis 1. And it was Elohim himself who separated himself from his word, his light, the manifest presence. And yet you have to ask, how is he separated and able to function? Because they have been echad, one, right? And so I don't understand all of the insight of that, but I do know that Elohim is omniscient, omnipresent. And in order to redeem man, he had to take some of that omnipresence and place it inside the confines of a body. And that's what he did. And he typified that in the stellar heavens in the course of the sun. And so there had to be a remedy supplying redemption for fallen man. Someone who was able to walk between the pieces as a mediator. And this is exactly what Moshe is speaking to Yahweh about. And he promised to go before them into Canaan. A promise that was evident to all the nations around them. The nations themselves are in need of redemption. Elohim is being declared as righteous to judge them. And if that's true, asked Moshe, then where is the one who is able to walk between the pieces? But when you read it in the King James English, it looks as if there's an argument here, and Moshe is just brazen and audacious. But if you go back and look at what was happening, I'll qualify what Moshe is doing. And from Isaiah 43, verse 26. The prophet here says, put me in remembrance. This is actually Elohim speaking prophetically. Put me in, isn't that what Moshe is doing? Put me in remembrance. The house of Israel is about to be cut off. Yahweh is not going to go before them into the land of Canaan, but he has promised. And so there has to be someone that will stand up and plead, litigate on their behalf. And that's Moshe then becomes a type himself of one who would walk between the pieces. Even though he can't, he becomes a foreshadowing, if you will, of the coming Messiah. Come, let us plead together, declare thou that thou mayest be justified. That word for plead, shafat, is a Hebrew word that means to litigate. In addition to litigate, it actually includes all the regulation and the disposal or how the litigation is to be administered, how ordinances are to be set and administered. And so if you go back and look at the context of Isaiah 43, it is all about the redemption plan of Israel and how they once again had failed. And if they will only return to the proper administration of the ordinance of Elohim, they would be justified. That's exactly what's happening here in Exodus chapter 33. Was this hurting y'all or helping you? This is why you have Moshe seemingly arguing against Yahweh, because Yahweh was choosing to remove himself. But Moshe's reminding Yahweh of the creation covenant, the covenant between the pieces, those same ordinances where he, the light, becomes that smoking lamp that walks between the pieces. He clothes himself in a body. Had Elohim, the Spirit, refused to go with that light and its subsequent pattern of redemption, on a lesser scale, it would have been the same as if he had refused to go with Israel into the land of Canaan as he had promised. There would have been no redemption for man. Elohim required righteousness, and had he not chosen to take on the garment of the flesh that could be seen and touched, redemption would never have come. That is why Moshe is told, no man can see my face. You can't see Elohim and live. You can only see him manifested in the garment called Messiah. That's the creation covenant. And it can only be administered by the rehearsing of the same patterns. You and I have to put on the garment of salvation, Yeshua. That act is clearly demonstrated as we dress or garment ourselves in every one of the rehearsals of the set times. Those set times are clearly delineated in the creation covenant calendar of 360 days. Now, I have to ask you a question. We've been talking about Moshe, a little bit about King David. Is the Torah, the law, the word of Moshe, consistent with that of King David? Is it possible that King David had the same privy knowledge of this conversation that Moshe had with Elohim? It's my opinion that the evidence is uncanny. Let's look, Psalm 104, verse 2. I've got 16 minutes. Who covers thyself with light as with a garment, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain. The word covers, atah, to cover oneself deliberately and hurriedly with a cloak. Light, the Hebrew word or. If you look at the definition of this word light in the Hebrew language, it's actually speaking about, listen to me carefully, it's not speaking about that light hanging from that ceiling. It's not speaking about the sun. It's actually speaking about the original source or luminescence that was light. He, the light. It's not talking about the byproduct of that light, which was later deposited into the heavens. What it is speaking about is him, the mediator, the light, who became the incendiary or the igniter of the heavens. The heavens likewise took on the form or figure, the DNA, the garment of that light. He chose to garment himself. He was light. And he chose to garment himself in the heavenly luminaries. The word for garment here, salma, garment. But it's interesting because if you look at the Shin Lamed root, it conveys the idea of something being brought to a completion or to a finish. And at the same time, if you add the mem on it, it gives you the idea of shalom, peace. But it also hints at a specific sacrifice. Isn't that interesting? We're talking about covenant between the pieces. Now you have to remember, as we're looking at these things from a Hebraic mindset, if that Shin Lamed root means to bring something to a completion, to finish it, to complete something does not indicate a linear idea or a concept. From a Hebraic perspective, the completion is a circular concept. And so if you look at that Shin Lamed root, it gives you the word shal, which alludes to a powerful sin, the idea of a powerful sin that's worthy of death and has to be paid. And so man cannot, Abraham cannot, Moshe cannot affirm the covenant between the pieces. Only the Redeemer of man could. And so, it is my contention that each divine appointment on a 360-day calendar, listen to me carefully and see what you think, that each divine appointment is an interlude, a rest stop on the figure 8 of the sun's course, eternally etching the Hebrew letter chet, a fence. I thought that was interesting because the Hebrew letter chet, figure 8, chet is numerical value. It's the number 8. Indicates new beginnings, life in the heavens and the earth. It also indicates a path that's circumscribed by the sun. Listen to me. As it's circumscribing it, that figure 8 also can serve as a fence. A fence can separate. But at the same time, as it's separating, simultaneously it also becomes the makom, the place. While it's separating the flock that does not belong to the shepherd, it also serves as a place where the shepherd is standing there watching carefully, earnestly looking for his flock to be gathered at the makom, the place. It's my contention that the makom, the place, is the altar throne, also known as the tekufa, the marking of the shadow, which launches us into the course of the sun every year and then comes back as it ends that same cycle. From the first half of Psalm 1, listen to this. This is mind-staggering, the next couple of verses. From the 104 verse 2 text, we can glean that David is expounding upon the role of Yahweh, the manifest presence, the one who would deliberately and knowingly set limits on his omnipresence by sacrificing or placing himself in a garment, a body of light. And then he would prophesy of that event in the heavens, revealing the details in the stellar luminaries, completing or finishing the redemption plan. That's why Yeshua made the statement, it is finished, kala. He finished the plan. That could only be rehearsed in a 360-degree cyclical calendar. Look at verse 2. You're the one that stretches out the heavens like a curtain. The word for stretches there is the word natah, which is literally can mean to stretch out, to pitch, or to bend something. But if you look throughout the Torah, it's associated always with the stretching out of the heavens in a tent-like fashion. Remember, the tabernacle was round. That same natah, you can't make this up, conveys the idea of a rod or a stave being carried across the shoulders. My yoke is easy. That enables the bearing of a burden, a charge, or responsibility. Is this the same yoke that would have been upon the plowman's shoulders? Once again, connecting us to Boker, Yagav, Anatole, Kadam, etc. And if you expand upon this picture, you can easily see, listen to me carefully, Yeshua as the burden. However, how many of you have seen the ancient Greek mythological, was it Atlas, who's standing there with the earth on his shoulders? Where do you think that came from? It comes from this Hebraic mindset. Listen to me. You can see Yeshua, the burden bearer, as the center point or the main load-bearing beam upon which the tent or the canopy of the heavens would rest. Once again, hinting at the heavens as a circular dome. Stretches out a curtain. The word Uriah, a tent curtain, or the tent itself. It hints at the vibrational frequencies in the creation's 360-day covenant calendar. Now, check this out. Because of what I believe King David knew and his knowledge of creation, if you go back and study Psalm 104 and you compare it to Genesis chapter 1, it reveals without doubt a clear reiteration of Genesis chapter 1. Days 1 through 3 of creation are seen in Psalm 104, 1 through 18. Day 4 in verses 19 and 20. Day 5 in verses 11 through 18. Day 6 in verses 20 through 30. Day 7 where he ceases from his works on the Shabbat, verse 31. Go back and look at it. And so once again, why would we emphasize the poetic works of King David rather than the historic works that a lot of people look to? And again, this is an argument that has been bounced around for generations, and the poetic works are often overlooked. But it's my opinion. Listen to me carefully. It's my opinion that the poetic works of King David should have a higher place of consideration because his words call forth the worship of Elohim. Why does King David say we should worship Elohim? Because of the creational character that is shown in the performance of those cyclical patterns that unquestionably prove the redemption plan and are intricately woven and inseparable from the creation covenant and its calendar. That's why King David writes it the way he does. It commands worship because of his unfailing character and promises. Now, Psalm 19, another powerful. We've talked about this so many times, verses 1 through 6. We've looked at quite a bit. It's my opinion that it gives you the picture of the heavens serving as a literal scroll, proving evidence of title deed and thus ownership. Listen to me carefully. This is also emphasized in Jeremiah 32, verse 14, where Jeremiah is instructed to place an open copy and a sealed copy, 2 copies. Place an open copy and then take a sealed copy and put it in a clay jar for preservation. Listen to me. There's an open copy up there, and there's a sealed copy that's been put in a clay jar and put in the earth. Are you hearing me? Regarding the testimony of the character of Elohim and his creation redemption plan in the stellar luminaries. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7 says, but we have this treasure in earthen vessels, right here. Deuteronomy 30, verse 19, I call heaven and earth. There's the two depositories or repositories where the scrolls are written, the heavens and the earth. I call heaven and earth to record this day against you that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life that both you and your seed may live. The heavens are the sealed scroll buried in the earth. Yeshua was a sealed scroll buried in the earth, only to rise again as proof of our inheritance. That's the pattern of the Son's course. Jeremiah was instructed to bury one in a clay jar in the earth so that posterity would later come back and excavate that and prove that Israel has title deed, not to just that one little enclave that we talk about today, but the massive structure of land that extends all the way down into Africa. Say amen. And if we pay attention to the words that were spoken by King David, heavens declare. The word safar, to record, to recount, to relate. There you go. Heavens declare the kavod, the glory. The original time of the separation, the original walk between the pieces. Day unto day, yom le yom. Yom connotes or gives the idea of the beginning or the dawn of the light. The root of it indicates the agitation of celestial fluid that's visible upon the breach of that darkness. Yom, yom, day unto day. He could have said day, day, yom, yom. But he said day leyom, yom leyom. The Hebrew letter here, lamed, suffices as a prefix. Yom leyom. It's giving you the idea of unto or towards something. Now listen to me carefully. Why would he put the lamed here? See, you got to understand the master is instructing Moshe what to write. And he's also instructing King David here, day unto day. And he puts that lamed. The lamed is the 12th letter of the Hebrew language, and its numeric value is 30. What's 12 times 30? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. 360. I got it. Homeschool high five. The lamed is the teacher, the instructor. The lamed is right in the middle of the yom yom, teaching and instructing. The lamed represents the Torah. The language of King David gives you the eternal power. pattern, the Shene or the mirror where each day follows the previous. The Lamed here serves to connect time. It's revealing time, till unto, day till day, day unto day. It's connecting time. The numeric value of Yom LeYom is 142, the same as the word Netzav, which means to take something and appoint it, to station it, to make it erect in order for it to stand. That same word Netzav is used in Deuteronomy to explicitly give you some insight regarding the setting of Israel's boundaries. It's talking about boundaries, day unto day. King David's talking about it. That's what he's pointing out regarding the establishment of the dawn day boundaries and how it's reckoning. Now, it's also interesting because you've heard me say before, I believe that light was the originator or the source of where blood is today. I believe after the fall that light is slowed down, the frequencies of light is slowed down and it becomes blood. Having said that, the ancients believed that Lamed, right in between day unto day, right in between Yom Yom, the Lamed being the crowned letter because it extends across the boundaries. The Lamed serves as a mediator between the 2 days. It is said by the ancients that the top knot on the Lamed represents a drop of blood or light that leaves a trail as it travels. Now, if you were to take and put it back the other way, fold the other end across it, you can see that it would give you the same course as the sun's trail. And so the rest of Psalm 19, now go back and read it for yourself. It affirms the conception of creation established by Moshe from Genesis 1 forward, and it's substantiated throughout the Torah. And it is my heartfelt desire that if you have not already made the changes necessary, first, those of you listening that do not keep the Shabbat, that should be your first obligation. Second, you need to learn how to mark the shadow. Why? It's the altar throne. It's where he's going to be found as he begins his course through the covenant of the pieces. We're going to mark it this next spring. It's not too far in front of us. It'll be here before you know it, and we'll teach you how to do it. You'll have no excuse. You need to learn to mark the shadow in order to properly celebrate the seasonal convocations. I don't know. I will just wait and let you mark it. That's fine. I'll be at the altar throne waiting. I'll be there. Tell them, we're going to be there. Say amen. My prayer is that you consider and research the truths that have been shown in this teaching, and I hope that you've understood it. Get the notes if you haven't, and I pray that this means as much to you as it did to me. Thank you for your attention this afternoon. Shabbat shalom.